This is Whittling by Mr. Ian M. Broderick. A plate was thrown, and Terry was banished again to the stoop in front of the squat little house on Honeydew Road. Terry didn't know why they bothered making him sit on the concrete steps. He could still hear the yells and the bad words. Everyone on Honeydew Road could. He figured they could hear them all the way to Apple Creek. Astronauts could hear his mother's shrieks. Some racket in there, huh? The voice was deeper than Terry's father's, but sweeter, softer at the same time. Whoop, sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. I wasn't scared, Terry said, putting his palms flat on the stoop behind him and puffing his chest. Just surprised is all. Mr. Holcomb smiled. Crooked white teeth erupted in the slash of otherwise monolithic black beard. He was shorter than Terry's dad, but broad enough that Terry figured he could break his dad in half if he wanted. Mr. Holcomb's attic was haunted. Everybody knew. But Terry knew there was only ghosts on TV. The girl in the window next door was just light through glass and maybe an old dress. Terry suppressed a giggle at the thought of his neighbor in a dress, barrel chest splitting seams. Can I sit? It's a free country, I guess. Mr. Holcomb sat delicately on the corner of the top step, grunting as he bent and being careful not to touch the neighbor kid. He planted his elbow on the concrete and leaned into it as a poodle of chest hair peeked out the top of his flannel. They argue a lot, huh? Guess so. My parents too. Never heard them? Holcomb threw his head back and laughter snapped out of him with the popping of his jaw. You're funny. They must tell you so. I don't think they've noticed. Terry crossed his arms and leaned forward. His blonde mop fell over his eyes so the world could only see his lips and he could only see the cracks in the sidewalk. I know what that's like too. My name is Al, by the way. He stuck a ham with 5 quarters on it where Terry could see. You're Terry, right? Terry nodded and let the man's paw envelop his own. Al Holcomb's palms were sweaty and his fingers curled up past Terry's wrist to the peach fuzz on his forearm in which he took so much pride. I've seen you out here a lot this summer, Al said. I work by that window. He pointed at the small circle of glass with the wooden cross across it. So you felt sorry for me, huh? Al shook his head and stroked his beard as if deciding what he felt. No, I'm not in the habit of feeling sorry for people. What then? Al Holcomb raised his shoulders and drooped his lips. Guess I just thought you might need a friend is all. You make friends with a lot of kids? Terry kicked at a loose piece of mortar until it flew down and skidded halfway to the curb. Kinda weird. I make friends with all kinds of people. He picked at a piece of brick between thick thumb and forefinger until rust-colored dust coated his fingers. Kids are just people, even if grown-ups like to pretend they're not. You sure don't talk like most grown-ups, Terry said, and a row of crooked teeth filled his face. The dentist said he'd need braces soon, or else his teeth would cross in front of one another like Nosferatu. Terry didn't know who that was, but he guessed the guy was in need of orthodontics. Al Holcomb mirrored the grin, allowed a small deep laugh to squeeze between his lips and out his nose. I should hope not. Most of us lose a little something important along the way. Do you know what I do? Terry shook his head and the blonde mop hula hooped around his ears. It's easier to show you, Al said. He slapped away dirt that wasn't there on his thighs and stood, towering over the boy. I'll be right back. A particularly loud curse rattled the windows of Terry's home, and the pair of them turned to see if the foundation was intact. I assume you'll still be here, Al said. Terry shrugged and the man trotted back to his own home. A pale yellow light appeared in the attic window for only a few moments. Then the room went to black. Al appeared again, something concealed in his grapefruit hand. Here. Al unfurled his fingers as if he were holding a baby bird and feared it might flutter away. It was no bigger than a chess piece, dark wood and ornate details visible even in the shadow of the man. The totem was finally held to the light, and Terry could make out its form, bent as he was, wrapped by the mystery in a way only a child could be. An owl? Terry asked. Al nodded. I carve things for people. I'm an artist, he laughed. But I don't much care for the term. Terry's bright eyes flashed as lids opened wide. It even has feathers! Al quickly shoved the dark thing in the child's small trembling hands. Terry turned it, watching the light catch on the carved plumes, the shadows drag across the broad, shallow beak. Like the one in the trees, Terry jerked his head, behind us. It's the owl in those trees, Al said, with forehead-wrinkling eyebrows and puffed chest. That's why I'm no artist. I just make cheap facsimiles of the world's beauty. Terry's gaze left the owl, searched the man's coppered face. Facsimile means copy. Oh, Terry nodded, as if he'd merely needed reminding of the definition. The weight of the carving brought his attention back to it. It took up the world and its creator and the silent house behind them, silent. I think I should get back to work, Al said, looking up and down the edges of Terry's house. Terry held the owl to him, but Al raised a palm. Keep it. It was commissioned and never paid for. I couldn't, Terry said in an uneven voice, already drawing the thing close to his chest. Al smiled and shook his head. Consider it a gift between friends. You could use it more than I could anyway. We're friends now, right, Terry? Terry's head bobbed up and down as if blown by the wind. Yaha, good friends. The words felt bittersweet on his lips. Who else could he call a friend? He wouldn't dare invite anyone from school home to the production his parents made. Al was gone, with a quick ruffle of the boy's hair. His mother opened the door soon after to tell him it was time to finish his dinner. Instinctively, Terry hid the little owl. The predatory bird found a place of honor on the little recessed shelf above his headboard that night. 2 days later, the midday sun was hammering at Terry's neck as his parents had a contest to stick the most cutlery in the wall. He hadn't even had time to grab his prized owl before being marched to his post on the stoop. He hadn't been out 5 minutes when Al Holcomb meandered over, hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, Mr. Holcomb. Terry stood and flailed his hands about his waist. Your owl's upstairs and my parents, they're at it and I can't bring... Terry, it's Al for the first part and we're friends for the second. He smiled and his beard parted for the warmth of it. I came over to see if you'd want to learn something. He withdrew his hands and revealed 2 small cylinders of wood and a pair of long-handled knives with short, flattened blades. Something hot and dense ballooned in Terry's chest, threatened to press the water in him out through his eyes. His dad had promised to show him how to change the oil in the car once, but that had ended with his mother kicking the oil pan over in the driveway. Terry stood there, holding his flashlight with all the pride his little body could muster. There was still a black stain in the cement. Well, Al said, holding a block and the blade to the boy. What do you say, champ? The boy hesitated only a moment before the snaggletooth grin stretched across his face, and even the thought of tears was a million light years away. He snatched the blade's handle, then the wood, and held them, trembling. Now that looks right in your hands. Al sat and beckoned the neighbor kid to do the same with a pat of his hand beside him. Now grip up on it like so. Good. It's nice and sharp. Safer that way. The pair worked out there for the better part of an hour, guided by the rhythm, the ebb and flow of the screaming couple inside. Terry, alternating between short, choppy slices and long, vicious tears of wood. Every movement Al made was as if he were cutting through hot butter. When the cacophony inside finally died, Terry held what Al called an interesting bird. He'd flashed a smile and a wink that didn't make Terry feel small at all. Al's block had peeled away to reveal a squat elephant with a curled trunk, modeled on one he'd seen at the zoo, he'd said. The elephant was already in there, Al said with a humble smile. I just let it loose. Terry couldn't decide if that were profound or pathetic in a way only adults could be, so he only nodded and chewed at his lip. The lessons went on like that for nearly a month, with Al carving masterpiece each time, and Terry approximating something a little better than the lesson before. Sometimes Al would give what he made to Terry at the end, and the mahogany menagerie had rapidly materialized in the boy's room. His parents hadn't noticed. Maybe didn't care. Maybe had set the whole thing up. Terry didn't care. He had a friend for the first time and could tell him everything or nothing, and both would be supported. Al told Terry about his work, how he'd learned the craft from an old uncle in the backwoods of Virginia, how he'd sold his first piece, a birch buffalo, at 15. Terry was already better than he'd been then, Al said. Terry didn't believe that, but the young blood vessels had swelled with pride all the same. "Would you like to see what I can really do?" Al asked one afternoon when the shouts were particularly bone-shaking. He'd come empty-handed. "Yes!" Terry jumped to his feet, filled with a mix of genuine curiosity and a desire not to disappoint his only friend. Al's grin was the widest Terry had ever seen, wide and full of teeth white as paper and something else the boy couldn't name. Maybe pride, he decided. "Follow me," Al said, and he whirled on his heels and strode to his front door, Terry in lockstep behind him. Al shut the door after them, as if he feared the air might escape from his foyer. Some part of Terry's mind registered the click of a bolt sliding into place, but his eyes had already found the innards of the home. Carvings of all sizes, some half as big as Terry himself, lined the walls. A statue of a woman from the waist up sat beside the stairs. Her gaze was uninterested, demure, and her uncovered top was anatomically correct as far as Terry knew. Correct enough to force his eyes back again and again. Every piece was as detailed as that owl, some more so. Feathers look as if they could be plucked, fur as if it could be shorn, and flesh as if it could be squeezed, as if it might bleed if it were sliced. "Don't look too long," Al said, as he laid a hand on Terry's shoulder, the weight of it threatening to drive him to the ground. "Come on, my favorite subject is in the attic. That way." He gave Terry a light shove and the boy stumbled up the stairs, finding his balance with the help of a banister, a carved python with an open mouth. "The ghost," Terry said a little louder than he meant. "It's just a statue people see." Al's laughter chased the boy up the steps, overtook him. Astute young Terry, very astute. Terry reached the top of the stairs, looked left and right at more busts of men and women. Al's heavy footsteps quickened as he neared the top, then ceased all at once. He nudged Terry to the left. "These are just celebrities," Al said. "The real money up these stairs there is in custom sculptures of people. You recognize him?" He pointed a thick finger at a man with sunglasses and an open shirt, one arm holding a microphone to lips frozen in a snarl. Terry shook his head. "It's the king! Before your time, I suppose. God, you are young." He plucked the blonde hair from the back of the boy's head, let it fall on his peach-fuzzed neck. "Not that young," Terry grumbled. His hand grasped a narrow iron doorknob and turned. "It's locked." "Oh," Al slapped his forehead. "Silly of me. Here." He handed Terry an old key tinged with oxidization. It inserted roughly, turned with struggle, and then the door was open and Terry in after it, head on a swivel to see what sights there were to see. Only a trickle of sun streaked the room. The shadows of a dozen pieces littered the attic, each of them close to Terry's proportions. His eyes adjusted to the dim, examined each curve of wood with fascination, then something else. "They're all kids," Terry said. "My age." He pinched the loose spots in his jeans and widened his shoulders. "I do love working with kids." Al flipped on the light. Something shadowed until then moved, scuttled closer to a dark place in the corner of the room. It drew itself up into a ball and shook. Two flashes of white under filthy brown hair dropped a rock in Terry's stomach. She was gaunt, no older than he was. A thick black collar covered most of her neck, a small lock dangling over her throat. "I've been wanting to work with you for a long time, Terry." Al's hand crept back from the boy's shoulder to his mouth. "I'm so happy to have my two greatest inspirations together." The attic door shut.